thank you very much. For me, it's an honor because this is a topic that is so close to my heart. And what I will be doing today is to remind ourselves, those of us who work in this field, of our understanding of grief generally, and then highlight how COVID-19 has complicated that and what is emerging from the way in which grief is showing up in relation to COVID-19. And then Sumaya is going to come in and look at the strategies for dealing with grief. We are hoping that you can, of course, take some stuff personally for yourself, but we understand that most of you are actually working with communities, you are leaders, and you've got influences in various spaces. And hopefully some of this information can just give you some tools, or if not tools, just an appreciation and understanding of how the people you are working with are impacted. So I just want to start first by highlighting, we know Kubler Ross, who's done a lot of work. I mean, her book in 1969 on death and dying and looking at how emotions impact is really the basis of most of our work around grief. And I think this is really still important. So I will touch a bit more on the 4 stages of grief that she talks about, which is shock and denial, anger and blame, depression and then finally acceptance. And just as, of course, she says that this is not linear. I mean, it changes. I just have a cousin of mine who lost her daughter last year, but she's gone back now because it's anniversary of the death is actually likely to take people back to the first stage. So some of the things that we know from the stage of shock and denial, and it's even emerging also with COVID-19 and other losses, just this question initially of just asking, like, why me? You know, this can't be happening. I mean, and with COVID, people will say, but I just saw them, like I talked to them yesterday and they said they were okay. And some of the people would have posted a day before telling people I'm feeling better. And the shock is also about questioning, like, where did we go wrong? What is it that I could have done differently? And if people stay stuck in this shock and denial, it results in a delay in seeking for help. And of course, people's functionality is impacted. And what we know in terms of the understanding of the brain and how it functions is that for us to function optimally, we need to use our cerebral cortex, which is the part of us that makes us human. But in this stage of shock and denial, our amygdala gets activated. And when our amygdala, which is the part of the brain that stores emotion, is activated, then the cerebral cortex becomes suspended. This is really, really important, I think, especially for some of you that are managers and managing people or going into communities, that when people are in this stage, it is very difficult to reason, to talk. They need a container to contain those emotions first before you can be able to engage with their cerebral cortex. And of course, the second stage is that stage of anger and blame. And I want to propose, I mean, part of my theory is that some of the violence, there's other explanations around the violence we saw in South Africa, but some of it is really this like collective nature of grief that we have, and this heightened rage and anger and blame. So this is where there's just, when you come into reality with the loss and what it is, people can be angry towards God and environment, but why? Like, why is it happening? And with COVID, it's much more difficult because you don't even know this enemy. Some people say, like, this tiny, we can't see the enemy, we don't know this thing, it is just this tiny thing that can invade our bodies anytime it comes. We also find a lot of anger towards the system itself, whether it is government, sometimes it's seen as being unfair. So if you work for organizations, you are likely to see increased agitation and anger towards institutions. People are really angry about systems that, of course, might have been flawed before, but now the people are looking for something to direct their anger to. So people at like some leadership level, if you're working in communities, systems around how you distribute food, which is why I'm really insisting that in instances like this, we really need to have integrate emotional well-being in how we do our work, food packages, right? Because of the emotional states of people. And of course, anger towards, if you are in a leadership position, you really become the outlet of this anger and frustration. And also some people really struggle with the person who's left, you know, couldn't they have done something? Couldn't they have done something differently? And it can be really difficult when you've lost someone close to you, but yet also you are angry with them. And the issue about these stages is really the fact that they are normal processes. The challenge comes when you get stuck in the stages and you are not able to move. And there's this syndrome that is called the California syndrome, right? Where people found that people who couldn't be there for their loved ones, especially the elderly, when the elderly start getting sick and they feel guilty that they couldn't be there, they start abusing the doctors, guilt compensation. And we are seeing this a lot in South Africa, a lot of anger towards the healthcare personnel and being directed. So sometimes it's not even just the healthcare personnel. So those of you that are there to care for communities, people who are in the caring field, can be so painful because it's like the very same people that I'm working to support are not grateful, but they are directing their anger towards me, but it's again because of their stage. And of course, as guilt, like, could I have done something wrong, different? Could I have protected myself? Could I have protected them more? Could I have? And this could I have can be so painful to deal with. It comes with really difficult emotions. And what we actually see is that when people are in the stage of anger and blame, there's a likelihood of increased abusive behavior at home and at work. It's been interesting through the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership, I do a lot of work with leaders and institutions and quite a lot within government. And people have just said that there's been such high levels of toxicity within organizations. Leaders that screaming at people, sometimes being physically abusive. So we are seeing this stuckness, this anger and blame playing itself out in various areas within the workplace. And of course, this is the painful stage. So most of the time when people think about grief, they tend to think only about the depressive state and not fully appreciating the previous two stages of shock and also the stage of anger and blame. So this is really just like that stage of complete hopelessness. People could be suicidal at this stage. And of course, the routine is affected, changing of food patterns, changing of sleep patterns. People become really forgetful. Now, it really gets difficult with the COVID-19 because the brain fog is also one of the impacts of COVID-19, but also it can be an impact of grief when people are still struggling with grief. And we have people in South Africa who are struggling with the loss of their loved ones, but they are still also struggling with the long effects of COVID-19. We see people really withdrawing from the same thing that they need. I have one of the clients who's a leader, like a high-level leader. She's like, since I had COVID and I've lost loved ones, I have been in my room for the past 2 weeks. I can't leave because I'm so scared of being infected, but also, again, I'm just dealing with the loss. So even the very things, the fear of COVID-19 exacerbates these withdrawal symptoms. Absolute exhaustion. Again, there's exhaustion that is linked to COVID-19, but we also know that when people are in their depressive stage of grief, they just struggle with absolute exhaustion because just dealing with the emotions takes so much energy. You see an increase in drug and alcohol abuse. And of course, as you would expect, poor performance shows up. And it's really important. It was so interesting. I had like one of my clients saying, I really don't understand. Like at work, they know me. They know that I perform well. Now I had COVID and I've lost my loved ones, but no one is coming and saying, no, we understand that there has been a shift in our performance. What is happening? We have a tendency to always blame poor performance on people's character, on their laziness. But it's really important. I mean, as this book that I really like, that was produced by Oprah and Dr. Bruce, that says, before we can blame people, let's ask them what happened to you. What is happening to you to cause this poor performance? And of course, the stage of, finally coming to terms. I don't like calling it acceptance because I don't think you fully accept. But it is really just the final stage where you come to terms. And here's the thing, when you come, there is a direct correlation between your capacity to come to terms with the loss. Right? It can be a loss of your loved one. And again, I want to highlight that grief is not just about the loss of loved ones. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a loss of something in your life. But for you to come to in contact with the loss, you need to come to terms with your own mortality. Right? It's one of the most difficult things for human beings, because what we do is that we survive by protecting ourselves. We get into the car because we're like, no, nothing bad will happen to me. These are the assumptions that help us to survive. But of course, this kind of grief just shatters that completely. And with COVID, it's even worse. Not only are you coming to terms with your mortality, COVID is so real, and you are hearing so many stories. So you can already see how grief in the context of COVID-19 becomes much more complicated. It is also about accepting. So she calls it accepting the new reality, right? And this is really, really important, because most people really struggle to move to this stage, because they will say, I don't want to forget my loved one. So it's not about for just forgetting, but it's accepting without forgetting, and being able to embrace the present and say, you know, I embrace all that is there. Some people really struggle with being happy, because being happy almost feels like a betrayal to the loved one. And being able to be okay that sometimes I'd be really sad, sometimes I'd be really happy, and it's okay to hold both emotions at the same time, starting to go back to functionality. And there is this, I really love this. I mean, if you can, Nora, I hope I'll say it properly, Nora McInerney, Ineni, yes. She has this TED talk. I love it. If you can, I mean, she specializes in dealing with grief, and she had lost her husband. And she says, we have to start to talk not about moving on, but moving forward. She says you move forward with that person or with that loss still present in your life in different ways and in different form. Because a lot of people feel so much pressure, like, I can't move on. You know, some people find that years later, you still stay with the presence of that person in your life. And that is okay. And also dealing with this altered reality of changing of roles and responsibility. All of these things really require a lot of psychological energy. Now, you can see just from the description that I've said that just that alone, right, the normal grief, put it in inverted commas, is difficult in and of itself. It can put a lot of strain in the psyche and the emotional wellness of individuals. But what has emerged in the Europe study, one of the studies that are emerging in Europe, because they are, you know, ahead of us in terms of dealing with COVID, they actually show that there is a stronger link to acute grief with corona, which is very similar to the traumatic loss, like so the loss that we will have through medical suicide. It is very important for us to understand that when we are talking about corona-related grief, we're not just talking about the kind of normal grief, which is difficult in and of itself. What even complicates this, right, in South Africa, but I think just globally, is that the losses that are related to corona, we're just chatting briefly now, and already Kim was saying she was just counting that in the past 2 weeks, she's lost close to 9 people that she knows. And then we hear stories of the Fergusons, the people we know, that we feel we know because they were celebrities, it hits us. So what makes it even more complicated is that with COVID-19, first of all, the loss is multiple, so the magnitude of the loss. Secondly, the length of the loss. So it started in March last year, and it just keeps on happening. So it's a prolonged loss, prolonged period of time where we are having one loss after the other. And the more it happens, the more intense the losses, you know, the quicker the strain takes away the people close to us. And the scale of the loss, it is at a collective nature. I mean, I was just talking to a friend and I was saying, you know, like there is someone very close to me who's lost a loved one. Nomfundo, I am usually there for her. I had to drop the phone. I could not be there because I just didn't have that psychological capacity to contain her, because I myself am dealing with loss. So even for those of us that are carers, it's unlike, okay, I'm supporting people who are going through something that I might understand and identify, but I'm not going through. So we are like wounded healers in a way. So the collective and the scale of this loss. And of course, the fact that it's not just prolonged, it's continuous, it's just happening. It's relentless, like these losses. I've just been saying that like there's not even a language to explain, to expect what we're going through. And it's a repeat, you know? So it's multiple in a sense that you lose there's multiple losses at one time, but it is repeat because there's this loss, then the next month is another loss, then it's another loss. It's like we are in this heightened state as a society. So you can see, I mean, small wonder we saw what we saw in South Africa with for other people, because it's not just like losing their loved ones, it's also the jobs. So this traumatic acute loss like brings this sense of it's so senseless. Like, how do we expect? It doesn't even make sense. And what we know as human beings is that we are creatures of meaning making. We are able to function when we can make sense of something, when we can frame it, when we can understand it. But when it is senseless, it's much more difficult to deal with. The inability to comprehend, right? Because the role of our cortex is there to take what's happening in our amygdala and understand it and find a language. Some people say, I don't even have a language. I don't even have the ability to mourn the person. There's also all these intangible losses in our country. I think, you know, every time I go back to visit my in-laws in Soweto, I just have a knot in my stomach, guys, because the level of loss, the depth of loss. I was talking to a friend who was also been retrenched, and she says, you know, Nomfundo, people don't understand what retrenchment can do to people over and above the COVID-19 losses. And the inability, we are, by nature, we are creatures of connection. You cut away connection from us, you destroy us as human beings. But by nature with COVID is my aunt who lost my uncle last year through COVID. She says the most difficult thing for me, Nomfundo, is I had this person in my life for close to 40 years. But in his last moments, I could not be there. I couldn't even say goodbye to him. And of course, all the rituals we know that helps us to grieve are taken away. The speed with which it happens, like within few days, right? And of course, the fact that we don't even understand this thing as yet. So what we know is that the likelihood that the grief related to corona is going to bring complicated grief is really high. And the likelihood that people might need professional help is high. So if you are in the helping field or you've experienced this and you find that you are either have like no grief, so like because when you completely dissociate, it's like you feel nothing for a long period of time. You're like, I'm numb. There is a likelihood that you might really need support. And the good thing is, I mean, Sumaya is gonna come, CSVR is able to offer some of the services with highly trained professionals and is able to do it for free. And if they can't help, they can refer you on. Delayed grief, where just over a period of time, you have no grief, no symptoms. And what is complicated, of course, in South Africa, at least in our culture, is that we used to stay for the whole week, you know, cry and sing together as a family, make food together. So that allowed us, gave us space to scream and cry. But the fact that those things with COVID get taken away, you know, even the person who's passed on can't be brought into the house. I remember for my mother-in-law, she was like, the fact that my husband can't come to my house, he just passes. Unfortunately with her, because she really begged people, they just brought him next to the gate, but he couldn't enter the house. So all of this stuff result in this delayed grief. And then, of course, protracted and prolonged grief. So under normal circumstances, about 10% of the cases are expected to have this kind of grief. But with corona, we're seeing more and more cases having this protracted and prolonged grief. And also, you know, isolated grief. So when people have absolutely no one. That's why I've been saying to people, you know, the best gift you can give during this time, if you want to help, is just to pick up a phone and just check with someone and say, how are you? And let them talk, even if it's 30 minutes. Just the capacity, because grief and pain, especially traumatic grief, looks for someone to hear it, to witness the pain, and to contain the pain. Just doing that. And I think those of you that are working in communities, whether you're distributing food or supporting them, just, you know, you being able to be that container that says, I may not do much, but I'm here. I don't want you to have the isolated grief. Can really make a difference. So I'm just going to hand over now to Sumaya, who is going to talk a bit more about strategies, and then hopefully we'll still have some time for questions Over to you, Samir. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Nomfundo.
Thank you, Nomfundo, so much. Yeah, I think just listening to Nomfundo, there's so much that I think of, just my own experience and listening to clients that I can connect with. And I can imagine that for a lot of people on this call, there's thoughts that are coming to your mind or experiences that you had that can connect with this experience, what Nomfundo is speaking about. And really makes me think about what we're going through as a country collectively at this moment, and how things have changed. COVID has exacerbated the mental health problems, the socioeconomic problems. But related to grief, I think it's really changed the way that we grieve. It's changed the way that we mourn. Like Nomfundo was saying, these processes are now, it's something else. And it's saying, okay, what do we do? Because those are the things that helped. The conversations with family on the days of the funeral, the days leading up to the funeral, the days after, those sharing of stories of our loved ones, that was a process of emotional catharsis. It was a process of letting this person, we witnessing them in a way, we testifying, and those were parts that really, it helped us to mourn. And in this COVID isolation, COVID protocols, we find that we're not able to do that. And so really looking at ways of creating, creating containers of support, psychological and emotional support, and spaces where we can feel held is so important. So looking into ways that we could, cope, ways like strategies, as Nomfundo said, and these are, I would say, suggestions. I think that for each individual, there's different things that work. And it's finding out, what's going to work for me? What provides me with the feeling of being held, of being contained, of being supported? So some of the suggestions that I'm noting out today is really around reconnecting. So we know that we have this levels of isolation, physical, and then there's social as well. But also there's emotional isolation, where people who are grieving within families or networks shut down. So we're not wanting to talk to each other about what's going on. And because we're not face to face and we're not meeting each other, it's more reason just to avoid. And so how do we reach out to our family and friends? And how do we find ways of supporting each other, even though we're unable to meet in person? And so I found it's really, it's been interesting that WhatsApp groups of family and social support WhatsApp groups have really increased over this 1 and 2 year period almost. And people are finding ways to say, okay, how do I, send a message of support to my family? So they're doing the WhatsApp groups. But really it is a space of saying, we are thinking of you. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm sharing, and finding how can we share those experiences with each other. So finding personal ways to say goodbye, and this may provide some comfort or closure. I think that, like I said, a lot of our cultural, religious, our rituals, those processes helped us to find closure. They helped us to find ways of saying goodbye. But within this time period, we're not allowed to do that. Like Nomfundo is saying, the body's not allowed to come into the house. You're not allowed to go to the church. You're not allowed to go, to the mosque or the synagogue. So how then do you find that closure? Is it writing a note? Is it putting something up on the family group? What is it that would provide you with closure? And then, as Nomfundo was saying, and I think that this is very important in this time, speaking to a trained professional if you need further support. And I'll share with you guys some available services that you can access. And speaking to a professional, we're talking about let's connect with family members, let's friends, and build this containment. At times, it might be very hard for us to speak to the people that are very close to us about the pain that we're feeling, about the feelings of anger, about the feelings of guilt. This is the last thing I said to the person before they were hospitalized. But this is the the feelings that I'm having inside around not doing enough. And how do I share that with family? And then having someone that you can talk to, where it's a confidential space, to be able to share and process and work through those feelings. So it is, just a natural response as well for when we hear about someone that has lost someone, that to offer support, to offer care. And sometimes you might not even know what to say. I had an experience recently where a friend had lost her dad, let's say on Monday, and then on the Friday she had lost her grandfather. And I'd really felt, what do I say? So that initial kind of, hi, how are you doing? I felt like I can't even say that. She just lost her dad. What do I say? And I just said, I honestly don't know what to say right now. I have no words, because that's what I felt. I felt so like this is so overwhelming and I don't know what to say. And that's okay. Even not knowing what to say, that is okay. And just saying, I'm here. That's all I can be right now. I'm here. I don't know what to say to comfort. Sorry, my screen is stuck. So when we look at other individuals that have lost someone and we're feeling like, I don't know what to say at this moment, like I said, the best thing that we can try is just to be there for them, to ask them, what can we do to help in this difficult time? Is it, should I call you in the evening? Should I just send a message to check in? What is it that I can do? Do you want me to cook a meal and send it over? What is it that we can help with? And some people may not know what they need at that moment. They might not even have anything to say. And so there's been, I think, numerous times we're sitting with clients on the phone, not saying anything. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to talk. What's happening. And we just sit there. We just sit on that phone, but knowing that there is someone there, someone who's just listening to me breathe, but I'm not alone in this. But that is comforting in itself. And checking in. So checking in with the person regularly. I think that's so important. At times I think the human ways, right? We ask a question, we get an answer. Sometimes we're not going to get an answer. And that's okay. It's sending that message and saying, hi, just checking in, thinking about you. Hi, if you'd like to chat, give me a call, send me a message. I'm available. Just letting someone know I'm here. I'm here. And especially in these moments of isolation, where someone could be sitting in their home, grieving and going through a loss alone, not being able to access support from their neighbor or go to the grocery and just interact with people. Just checking in is so important. Just letting them know that you are there and you care for them. Like we said, we're not able to visit at times. It depends on what level we're in. And as we've seen, the levels change depending on the situation. But sending thoughtful messages, connecting. I think one of the biggest things that COVID has pushed us to is to find creative ways of connecting. That's something where, people are sharing more TikToks and, videos and saying, let's Zoom to have a coffee date. Let's do breakfast together over Zoom, but just finding ways of reconnecting. I said to a colleague of mine, like, I miss that I took it for granted, but I miss the fact that when I was going through a difficult time, I could walk to your office and have a chat. And that feeling that I left with, of feeling supported, of feeling comforted, I can't do that anymore. And I said to her, let's find a way with everything that's going on and so much that's happening. Let's find a way that we can still recreate, not the space, definitely not, right? But recreate what we found in each other. That feeling of support, that feeling of someone hears me, that feeling of I can go there and complain. And how do we just find ways of recreating that for ourselves. Important to know when it's time to get help. When you're noticing, like Nomfundo is going through the grief stages and talking about, the feelings of anger, the feelings of depression, the feelings of even anxiety, right? Because we sit at times and it's like, I just lost someone, but someone else is now COVID positive and someone else has been hospitalized. So I'm sitting here, I've got that, but I've also got something else, which is this anxiety around what's going to happen and the uncertainty around that. And when these things, you're noticing that it's impacting on your ability to do your everyday things, your ability to function. You say, okay, I need to get up today. I've got A, B, C, and D to do. And you're actually saying, I can't. I'm not going to get up for the whole day. And I'm not going to get up tomorrow. And just noticing these changes that are happening that now are impacting on how, you need to get up and do life. But I can't. But it's impacting to a point where you're noticing that it's actually unhealthy. It's not healthy for you. That is a time to, one, reach out to family and friends before that stage comes, but at that point to reach out to a professional, someone that you can talk to, someone that can also help you to process what is happening in that moment, help you to develop coping skills, help you to really say, okay, what's happening and how do you want to go through this? And let's kind of walk through this maze together. And having a professional do that with you, someone who is trained and someone who has a lot of knowledge around how grief, how depression, how unwell-being can impact on the mind, the body, and just the emotional spaces can be very helpful. I have shared here at the bottom the CSVR Trauma Clinic hotline. Okay, so this line is open and you can call in. Your contact details will be taken down and a clinician, a mental health professional, will contact you to get more information about what is it that you're going through and how it is that we can help. And from there, they will then provide online counseling services, and we provide this via telephone or via Zoom or even WhatsApp call, depending on what works best for you. And I've also shared a number of other resources, right? So these are other also online, so telephonic resources, and that's the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And their contact information is there. I will also send this through to Kim and she can forward it to the group. I've also included the Childline South Africa, and they're also primary counseling services for children up to the age of 18. And I think that that's, a space also that I think when we think about children and going through grief, it's a space where we must not forget about them, that they are hearing all the conversations, they are part of what's happening around them, and not to forget about them because there's an impact as well in terms of how they're experiencing the losses of how they're experiencing this time of COVID. And so I've included those resources as well. And then Lifeline and FEMSA. Those are also two organizations that provide, they also provide face-to-face counseling services. But I think at this moment with the COVID situation, most services are gone online, that is either telephonic or via, Zoom, etc. And these services are free. There's no cost to these services. They are very useful and accessible. So I think that that's something also that's very important, that these services are accessible. They're accessible to you in your home, in the comfort of your home. And they also have emergency lines that you can contact 24/7, which you can find on their website, which you can contact whenever you need. like I said, I will send this through to Kim and she can share with the rest of the group. Thank you.
Over to you, Laura. Thank you, Samaya. Thanks.
Thank you, Samaya and Nomfundo. It just has reiterated a lot of very important information that we've kind of been gathering and putting together over the last while. And I don't think one can ever underestimate what's really happening in our nation. And it's particularly hits me quite hard when I realize that this is affecting people from many, many different roles across society, from those in CEO positions that are deeply worried about their employees and their employees' families and what that is, never mind what it's doing to their business practices, but it's what's happening to their work colleagues and how to hold space for their work colleagues in that container, all the way through to your nonprofits and your facilitators and coaches and mentors that are out there, and anybody who's really seeing that on the ground and feeling a little bit helpless at the scale of what is actually happening. It's not a time for us to get very depressed about it. We need to be reminding each other that this too will pass. We really, really hope so. I don't know how long it's going to take to pass, but it will pass. And we need to make sure that we maintain that joy in our life and the humor in our life that keeps us at that level of an attitude so that we can keep looking forward. What I'd love to do now with the remaining time that we've got is I'd like to open this to the floor for comments, either to Nomfundo or Samaya that you might have. Maybe you've seen a strategy that's particularly worked with your organization, or you have want to know about a particular strategy and whether you think it has validity or value. This is the time now to ask while we've got the specialists for this hour or so. So who would like to put something out on the table? Maybe I can start by asking Kate. So Kate Bain just come back from Izulu Orphan Projects in Northern KZN, where she's just done a very, very important to that organization on the ground to go and take a temperature of what she's seeing. And with the added level of the looting and the rioting that happened in the recent events, added on top of this whole COVID story, yeah, so maybe Kate can give us just a little bit of feedback specifically around how people are feeling about the emotional grief and the, what's happening there at the moment.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yeah, so I went back to KZN. I'm in Cape Town with Laura now, but I went back to KZN last week, and I myself through this whole thing have been very teary. Even now, coming back and seeing everything and be exposed to everything I saw last week, I even find myself battling to process it all and put it all together. But what I saw in Empangeni is where I spent my time. And I would say more than half of Empangeni got destroyed through the unrest. And a lot of my friends live in town and were right on the doorstep of literally the war zone going on. And my friends in Empangeni are very fearful, traumatized, angry. They're not sure how to process things. And so I left my friends. I know just even myself going there and being with them and being a new set of fresh eyes was a joy to them. But then the following days after that, actually going into the communities where our Centre Izulu Orphan Projects is based, and with my staff chatting about the different communities we work into. Some communities that live closer to town, maybe 80% of the communities were involved. And then the further outlying, maybe 40% of the communities were involved. And there were two sides to what we saw in the community. There were those, Monday and the Tuesday were the big days that it hit. And on the Monday, when it all started, my staff tell me that it was more like the baddies that were involved that initiated it all. But then on the second day, from the communities, you could even see half of Empangeni burning down. Two of the malls were on fire, and how panic hit the communities on almost like a second wave of where a lot of people thought that South Africa was now turning into Zimbabwe and that they would never be able to get food ever again. So when the second half of the community saw everybody coming back with carloads full of groceries and everything, a lot of people panicked and thought they would never be able to get food ever again, that Empangeni was going to be destroyed, and out of panic went to town to see if they could get any of the food that was left, thinking that they would never get food ever again. So now, even as we sit with the Zulu Orphan Project's team and to decide how do we move forwards now, working into these communities and the whole city of Empangeni as a whole, dealing with two very different sides of the coin. So, yeah, this is very much, I find it very overwhelming. It's more than I know what to deal with. But yeah, that's why we're grateful for the Greenlight Movement and grateful for the stoplight tool, because that's what we're going to very much be using for the rest of this year. It's going to every home, every household, every community, and just take one step at a time to see how this outplays. And I loved what you said about being the container, that we just go out into these communities and be the container that allows people to debrief about everything that they've been through, whether they were the perpetrators or whether they weren't involved, but just to tell the families that we are here, just to be here for them and just be their containers. What I've written down here is just the best advice. We don't have to have the answers. We don't have to know how this plays out, but just be available and be there and show them that we're around. Yeah, thanks
Kate.
Laura.
Nomfundo or Samaya, do you want to respond to Kate at all?
Yeah, yes, and then maybe Samaya also. Thank you, Kate. I'm also seeing some responses also in chat. So I think from your saying, for me, the first thing that I just want to chat about, I think there's a separate discussion we need to have about the looting. Understanding what causes it. Those of you who've heard me speak in other platforms, I have said that for me, this was a rupturing of our collective trauma. Unless we understand the collective trauma of South Africa, historical trauma, and how it interfaces with socioeconomic marginalization, which is what you do, we won't fully appreciate, what has happened and why. For example, Kate, like why people in such a panic then go, because for some people not having food and eating is not just about, well, I don't have food. It's like, I'm going to re-experience the psychological pain of being hungry that my mom and my dad had. So like it has this emotional intensity to it. And therefore, like the responses on how do you facilitate collective healing? How do you create collective, containers? And for me, really like critical issues of how we strengthen leadership within these communities and how we then support you as frontline workers on how you can be containers. And you can't be an emotional container to someone when you are overwhelmed. So a lot of frontline workers have got high levels of burnout themselves. And we've seen this, that during times of crisis, we burn ourselves, we feel guilty with that. And then of course, there's this thing like I'm going to my comfortable home and I'm sleeping, people don't have, then out of this guilt, we burn ourselves. But when we go to these communities, we don't have the capacity to contain. So we really, for me, the level of my own privilege has been so in front of me in this past few, I have struggled. But also I understood that unless I can deal with that, I can't be a container. So that's an interesting discussion, I think, for another time. But I think just in relation to grief itself, there's two things that you talked about. I think you talked about the issue of processing. Again, you know, our role is just to help people to process, and people process when they have a witness, you know, psychological pain, when it has a witness, it has a container, and it has a presence, a caring, supportive presence, right? And I think what you've highlighted, Tracy, around rituals, people no longer have rituals. Can people have new rituals, different rituals of how they can remember their loved ones, that we can support them around? And for me, I think I was excited to come here because definitely this group is at the forefront. And I've been saying to people, there's a lot of, you know, funding and support going out for distributing food and supporting communities. And communities are not going to come to us. If we deal with psychologically, they'd be like, hey, you know, a sign, you know, we're not crazy, we're not going to do that. But the frontline workers are really the vehicles of even picking up where people could be referred to. So how do we support the people in the front line better? And what you said, Laura, that the managers and CEOs are tired. And if we are tired and exhausted, we can't support our staff. And if we can't support them, they can't support the people. So we all have an important role to play. I don't know, Sumay, if you want to add something.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kate, for sharing. I think what just comes to my mind is, you know, the role that we play, and being conscious of that role where, you know, we're going into these spaces and we have the privilege, we have the resources, we're going home with bread, there's bread in the fridge, and this sense of, you know, what is my role here? You know, am I a savior here? Am I going to be a victim here? What is my role? I think unpacking that as well, because as we're listening to the stories, as we being the container, right? How do we hold that? You know, are we going to now say, okay, I'm going to bring my bread from my fridge and I'm going to give and give and give? And what happens with that, right? How much bread are we going to give before we don't have? And I mean, there's lots of things around it, but I think it's really around, if I'm a container and I'm a listener and I can be that space where I can take in stories, what then is my role and how can I then participate in the space, being mindful of that role? So I think the other thing, and why I bring that up, is I remember a case that we had in Gambia where, you know, there had been a lot of political violence and so forth. And once kind of the dust had settled, people were still feeling very angry, feeling that, you know, as we still don't trust the systems. There's that panic and fear and uncertainty around, it's going to happen again, it's going to happen again. And having this facilitator come in, and it was so interesting hearing her talk about the work, because she said, you know, I'm not doing psychological support, I'm not doing mental health, I'm doing just providing a container. And I said, okay, so what does that container look like? And she said, it's a listening circle. That's what we're just doing. We come into a circle and we're just listening. We're listening to experiences. We're listening to stories. We're listening to what people went through and their perspectives on it and others' opinions on it. But it's in the space where it's safe, it's respectful, and each one is entitled to their own way, to their own experience. And I found that so beautiful, because the power of, you know, just having your voice heard, I think is so important. And one of the things that we face in South Africa is that people feel, I'm not acknowledged. My voice is not being heard, right? And I think Nomfundo can speak more to it around, you know, the smoke that calls, the paper that was done, and different, what they're speaking to is the sense of, you got to make a big hoo-ha. We got to, you know, be burning stuff in the streets. We got to scream loud to be heard. We can't just be heard. We can't just be acknowledged. I'm not good enough and I'm not enough to do that. So I got to kind of bang things and light things up so that someone hears. So I think, you know, just creating spaces, small. I mean, we start off in our community projects really small, but creating those small spaces where people can be heard, and then hoping that the ripple effect, you know, can expand further. I think within that listening spaces, what is also very valuable is then finding just regulation techniques, right? So you must know people are there, they're talking about their experience, and it brings up emotion, right? Emotional memory. So we're getting excited, we're getting angry again, and we're taking us back to that moment where I felt these emotions originally, and now I'm bringing it into the space. And how do we then bring in regulation techniques to help someone and to help their body and their mind and their emotions? Remember, we're not back there, we're here. And those emotions are valid. Let's look at ways that we can manage them in a healthy way, where you can still feel heard, right? And still be able to manage this anger emotions that are coming up. And so within, the counseling spaces, what we work with clients is teaching them how to regulate their bodies and their physical reactions to trauma and the physical reactions to trauma memories, and then also emotional regulation and working on how do we regulate our emotions and our emotional responses to trauma when it is triggered within us.
Does anybody have another question they would like to put on the table, or just put your mic on and provide us with a comment? Something you've seen on the ground? Marie, you've got a comment you'd like to make here.
Thanks, Laura. I've just also seen that ending the sessions is quite an important step. Those circles, we're also doing those debriefing circles for a number of different environments, and just ending this with I take with me what is mine. I don't take your stuff with me. I take what is mine. You take with you what is yours, and we leave what is not serving us anymore in this space, and actively ending that session with a statement of closure as tremendous value for both the facilitator and the group members. So that's just something to share.
Thanks, Marie. Bron, I see that you talk about your CEO. He held a listening circle. How did that affect the people that were working directly with him?
Hello. I'm not 100% sure for everybody because we're quite a large group of people. But I mean, for me personally and people that I'm close to within our company, it brought a lot of healing, and was a very surprisingly, I say surprisingly, not because we're normally an unsafe space, but in that week after the unrest, a lot of people would have been amazed at how community pulled together and stood up to the baddies, in inverted commas. And just within our own company, how it created a safe space for us to share some really, really hectic things that people went through. And brought some, he called them sort of let's be human conversations. And I think for the first time for a couple of us, we really were human in the workplace. We weren't these kind of working horses. So I'm certainly very grateful to him for holding those sessions and being resilient and holding them every single day. And I'm sure others are as well.
Sure, that's wonderful to hear that somebody in that particular responsibility role is taking those steps. And I'd love to know that more CEOs and more people in the C-suite of positions were actually doing that. Nikki, Raw, you've got a really important question to ask Samaya and Nomfundo. Do you want to come online and just put it to them?
Yes, hi there. So as an organization, we deal with a lot of sub-organizations that are working with students in schools and a lot of leadership programs. And we have a lot of students that don't necessarily recognize that they're part of this collective trauma that you're speaking about. And I'm trying to find ways of how do we support these young people at the schools that they're in recognizing that they possibly are suffering from this collective trauma, because a lot of them are depressed, they are stressed, but they're not they're not connecting it to something like a collective trauma. Even possibly how to unpack what trauma is with young people is quite a difficult concept. I'd love some advice.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Very, very important question. And just to say, I know that we have Jeff in our midst. He is leading the education program within the Mental Wellness Initiative. And I know that we're looking in August on of actually having a session together with NECT and the Department of Education to look at the mental wellness impact of COVID, but of course now also this violence in schools, but also saying, how do you integrate mental wellness interventions? First of all, we know that young people are not going to come and say, hey, there's a therapy session and I'm going to come. And there's a number of suggestions. Of course, we can't exhaust it here, Nikki. We will maybe just Jeff could send you an inbox so that he can have your contacts. So the first thing that we say is we need to find ways of integrating. I'm very passionate about taking mental wellness outside of the therapy room into the spaces where people are at. So how do you integrate it in what they are already doing in their classes, in their assembly, in their sporting? So that's just really, my passion. But also, how do we speak into their language? What matters to young people now, and how can they see that not being okay mentally impacts that which matters? And what are some of the platforms that you can use? I know CSVR has got infographics now that they use. How do we access the Instagrams and the TikToks? We need to reach young people where they are at, speaking to their language. What we know is that once they are in the room, because they are young, they pick these things up so quickly and shift much quicker than adults. But in South Africa, we still see mental wellness as just therapy outside there. We don't yet fully appreciate how it infiltrates every single area of our life. Education is the key. Their own relationships, their schooling outcomes. And I think that there's ways in which we can do that. And it has to start, and I know what we are pushing, working with Jeff, is we need to support the whole schooling system, from the principals to the teachers to the SGPV, in order to be able to facilitate this. So they allow this to be integrated in their work.
Very powerful, Nomfundo. Sure. Yes. I love what you said there, taking it out of the therapy sessions, out of the offices and to the places where people are at. As part of the schooling, as part of sports, as part of their living schedules, routines. I think that's really brilliant. I'm very aware that our time has come to an end. There's so much more to talk about, but I want to thank you, Nomfundo and Samir, very much for providing us with your Madiba minutes to share your skill set, your expertise, the insights that you have. You are so right. There is so much more we need to discuss, Nomfundo, especially on that, when Kate was bringing up what she saw in KZN after coming back. That's a whole other conversation that possibly needs to be unpacked at some point, so that we don't go into fight or flight or freeze mode when more of these events arise, that we have a deeper knowledge of why they're happening and how to handle them, and how to not be caught up in the tremendous anxiety of the moment. But that is a conversation for another day, which we can talk about. If anybody has further comments or questions, you're welcome to send them to me, and I can always forward them on to Nomfundo and Samir. But I just want to thank you both very, very much for giving us of your time, and for everybody who joined us today. I've had a couple of WhatsApps while we've been sitting here saying, you've reached capacity, please, is there a recording? I'm going to have a recording, and I will send it out. So thank you very much for being here today. Have a very good week. Have a powerful week full of grace and empathy. And yes, may the light go with you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.